Welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back here in the studio. As you know, last week's show, we actually did that from the road. We were in Austin, Texas, in the new mobile studio. I've spending a little bit of time in Austin, looking at the innovations and startup community down there. We're going to be going back down to Austin here, maybe before the end of the year to do a whole series of shows and interviews. There's a lot going on down in Texas around innovation, technology, startups, etc. So you're not going to want to miss those series of shows. So had a great time. Hope you enjoyed last week's show from the road. That was the very first show that we've done from the new mobile studio. You may remember the old one. This is the brand new mobile studio. I think I've posted some pictures of the new studio over on the Facebook page or over on Twitter. You can check those out and take a look at what the new studio looks like. It's still a work in progress, but we're probably 85 or 90% there with that. So, most recently, as you know, we've been doing on and off kind of a series of healthcare, medical guests and shows and topics. If you're not familiar, Kim McNicholas, who actually sits in my chair every once in a while when I need to take a break. Kim is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, formerly with Forbes. She has regular appearances on Fox, etc. And Kim has her own show called Kim on Innovation. Kim has also most recently been focusing a lot on healthcare and medical, so I would encourage you to go over and check out Kim's show. You can find it over at theinnovators.network, or you can just search for Kim on Innovation. I would encourage you to check that out. She just recently did 2 shows with a lot of topics, interviews with medical professionals, healthcare professionals, dealing with all of the issues today that we face in today's world. But also advancements in medical devices and medical technologies, which then leads us to today's show here on Killer Innovations, and that is a topic around medical devices. Now, many of us with COVID, we've avoided going into doctor's offices or dentists or whatever because of not wanting to run the risk of getting COVID. So there's been a lot of telepractice procedures, dealing with, talking to your doctor if you got the sniffles or need a prescription refilled or whatever. But part of that challenge, though, is doctors can't do complete physicals with these telepractice procedures. And so there's a development of, and has been for quite some number of years, about all these medical devices that not only improve doctors' abilities, but also can be used today or in the future by patients at home who can, in effect, transmit data or share data with their medical professionals to allow for remote healthcare. So that is part of the topic, but a much broader context of what we're going to be talking about today. So today's guest is Clive Smith. Clive is the CEO and founder of Thinklabs. And Thinklabs works on a whole wide range of areas, but the one area that I was keenly interested in, why I wanted to have Clive on the show, was to talk specifically about the future and where things are going with the innovations around medical devices. So, Clive, thanks for taking the time to join us here at Killer Innovations.
Yeah, good to be here.
So let's get started and let's introduce yourself to the guests. Give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah. So, from anyone who recognizes this accent, I grew up in South Africa and I did electrical engineering. So my background is double E. And growing up, one of the things that people have told me, and I'm not sure I don't agree with it, is that engineers are born, they aren't made. And I think some of it is childhood influence. And one of the most influential events of my life was actually the moon landing. And there, as a kid in South Africa and seeing the moon landing, basically that sends a message to people around the world that technology happens in the United States. So, not only does it make you want to become an engineer, but it makes you want to do it in the United States. So I grew up in South Africa, did engineering, and then wanted to come to the States, and ended up at Caltech doing a master's. And so hearing about, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and things like that, which is affiliated with Caltech, is kind of exciting to come to Caltech finally. So that was, a long time coming from when I was a kid and they landed on the moon. So that was my entry into the United States. And I did my master's there, and I focused on analog electronics and signal processing. So those were the areas that I focused on. And then I went and worked in corporate America for a few years. And I was never born to be a large company employee. There wasn't in my personality from a very early age. So I think you're maybe born to be an engineer, and maybe you're also born not to be a very good employee. So I think that kind of got me going. So I spent a few years in corporate America, which is a great place to learn the right way to do things, and to learn how, organizations work and how they don't work. Both of them, they're both instructive. And then I went out and started Thinklabs. And the idea was that it would be an incubator for ideas that I came up with, and incubators that other people's ideas. And I spent about a decade doing other people's ideas while I was looking at ideas that I was interested in. And I had also had a long-term interest in medical devices. Even as an undergraduate, in my senior year as an undergraduate in South Africa, I actually developed an electrocardiogram machine with one of the other students, two of us, in a project, and we actually won a prize for the best thesis in doing this electrocardiography project. It was an extremely ambitious project. And so I always had this long kind of, history of wanting to do medical devices. Most of my friends from school ended up going to become doctors. So I was just surrounded by doctors everywhere. My brother's a cardiologist. So kind of marrying engineering and cardiology, or engineering and medicine, was kind of also in the cards. So a lot of these things have roots that are very deep and very long term, which is what I found in business as well, is that some of the relationships that you end up cultivating they take shape over a long, long period of time. A lot of them are old friendships. By the time you do business with someone, you might have known them for 10, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people underestimate the long run in that respect.
Well,
Anyway, so that was my beginning.
Hey, Clive, that's an interesting point, because there's a lot of, like, I run into young entrepreneurs or whatever, and their level of patience is pretty thin. And I remind them, I'm like, if you really want to go from a raw idea through an innovation and bring it to market, you got to build it for you got to have a lot of patience to build that. It's not I'm going to do it on a Monday and be launched on a Saturday. Now there's all those stories about overnight successes, but what you miss is all that history, that actually the inspiration, or in your case, the example you're giving is friendships. The people who can have just the right influence at the right time, who can contribute just the right elements at the time that they're needed.
Yeah, I think things take a lot longer than people realize. A typical overnight success probably takes about a decade.
Exactly.
The overnight success is what we read about at the, when they really hit the success. But there's so much groundwork. And if you go back in the history of any super successful corporation, or just about all of them, you really see what a long march it's been, what a long slog it's been to get there. And, you go back and you look, like I remember when BlackBerries were big, you go back and it's like, well, yeah, geez, when did BlackBerry start? Well, they hit something, I don't know, it took them 20 years before, they were doing networks and other things. Nokia, hit the cell phone market, in the 1980s or something. They were making telephone poles in probably the end of the 19th century or something.
Well, exactly, and that is the point, right? These things take a lot longer than anybody can anticipate. And even in my case, people have mentioned some product or technology I came up with, and I'm like, no, that was 15 years. 15 years of success. So, Clive, in the last segment we were talking about just medical devices and kind of your early project, and it brought back memories of Agilent, which used to be part of HP, and all the medical devices that came out of HP. Talk about where you picked up. Where did you go from the standpoint of working on medical devices that actually you were that came to market?
Yeah, so I was doing, a variety of projects actually in signal processing and electronics. But as I said, I had a long-term interest in medical devices, and I stumbled across an article in a cardiology journal in Circulation, I believe it was, where they discussed the stethoscope and the history of the stethoscope. It was quite an old article. And what they had done is taken something like 35 stethoscopes and measured their acoustics. And what they also did was they built a replica of the original Laennec stethoscope, which was a hollow tube. Laennec was the French doctor who invented the stethoscope in about 1816 and started describing how you diagnose patients using sound. So the acoustics of the original Laennec replica turned out to be about the same as a modern stethoscope. So here was this, the most ubiquitous medical device on the planet, basically hadn't had an performance improvement in at that time, I guess we're 180 years or something. So I thought, well, okay, I know analog electronics, I know signal processing, slam dunk, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to develop this thing, and that's going to be, as we would have called it, I'm going to make an overnight success. And I basically really literally started in my garage, and I started building and prototyping and figuring things out. And the sort of breakthrough came when I sort of asked myself a question. I tried different methods of sensing sound coming out of the body. And eventually I asked myself the question of essentially, what is a stethoscope doing mechanically, and what can I do electronically? And so what I did was I basically made a sensor that senses the diaphragm moving. And to this day, we actually have a unique way of sensing the signal. I came up with a unique sensor. And it probably actually, given that you mentioned Agilent, they actually play into the story. What happened was that at the time that I was developing this technology and I had this prototype in a box, Agilent, HP actually, at the time, it was 1999, HP private labeled a Canadian stethoscope, electronic. And I had been benchmarking this product with cardiologists against my prototype. And I had, found out that, in fact, what I had was far superior. And then the next thing, HP private labels it and becomes Agilent. And I called them up. They were in Andover, Massachusetts, the headquarters of HP Medical, as you well know.
Right.
And I called them up, and they said to me, well, what, the ink isn't dry on this contract. Why don't we wait a little bit? And we waited a little bit of time. It's always polite to look at other options for them. And I walked in there, and they said to me, anyone who's ever developed an electronic stethoscope has walked through these doors. Bill Hewlett actually asked when they bought the medical company, why isn't there an electronic version of a stethoscope? So they said this idea is really, it's as old as HP Medical. So we don't want to disappoint you. They listened to this prototype, and basically they'd never heard anything that good. And they actually ended up funding it. But while they were funding it and we were working together, they actually moved on and Agilent sold their healthcare division to Philips.
Yep.
Philips bought the healthcare division. Philips wasn't interested in stethoscopes. They got out of the business. And essentially I had a contract with them that said, if you like what we do in the development process, you can license the technology, and then you go on your way, I go on mine, I go and develop more products. anyway, they didn't have any interest in it, and the agreement that we had was that if they didn't go forward with it, I owned all the technology. They wouldn't get any license to it. So essentially, Philips bought them. Philips wasn't interested in stethoscopes. They were interested in ultrasound and imaging. I took all the technology and decided I would put it on the market myself.
Interesting. I didn't know that all that history on the HP side. That's
Yeah.
so. When did the first version of your stethoscope come into market then?
So we showed it first at the end of 2003 at the American Heart Association in 2003, November was when we showed it. And my relationship with Agilent / Philips was over the 2001, 2002 timeframe, roughly.
And so today, is it still fundamentally the same product, or what's been the lineage of it now?
So that the fundamental technology is still there, and it's still, at least my opinion and the opinion of our customers is that our transducing technology is still the best in the business. And so the fundamentals are still there. We had an initial product, which I took it to China. We manufactured it in China, and we sold that for some time. And then in 2013, as I was developing the new generation, I decided to actually bring the production in-house. So we went from Chinese contract manufacturing to our own production, not even American contract manufacturing, but American production.
So you vertically integrated then.
Yeah, we assemble, we do everything, and talk about vertically integrated. The Thinklabs 1, our current product, I designed every single aspect of the product. I did the software, the hardware, the mechanical design, the packaging, everything.
Okay. The problem is that some people refer to that as kind of a control freak innovator.
Yeah, control freaks have a mixed record. I think Steve Jobs was a control freak. I think he did okay.
I think Steve did pretty good. Steve Wozniak was also known as a control freak. He hand laid out all of his circuit boards. He would never allow for any automated tools to lay out his circuit boards. Woz always laid out his own. So yeah, the track record of control freaks is you can argue Elon Musk is a control freak. So
there you go. Well, it's not
you're in good company. You're in good company.
Yeah. Not bad. I'll take it.
So we're going to take another quick commercial break here. But before we go, one of the things I want to tee up for the next segment is for us to talk a little bit about what's been the experience with the customers. What stories have you heard from medical professionals, etc.? My wife's a nurse. I bought her first stethoscope when she graduated from nursing school back in 1982. And you're right. It's probably the same stethoscope she probably still uses or had used up until she retired from nursing.
Yeah, she's not going to thank you for mentioning the date.
Yeah. Well, when you're our age, you just kind of get used to it. I didn't give you her birthday, but you can calculate it from that date. Clive, as we were wrapping up the last segment, you mentioned the fact that you started off in the early version of the product as being manufactured, it's outsourced to an ODM manufacturer for offshore work, but that you made that decision to bring all of that back in-house to make yourself more vertically integrated. Now, what's interesting is that's the hot topic, in today's conversation with all the disruptions of supply chain and et cetera. But you did it, way before what now is turning into being the fashionable thing. What drove you to want to bring it back onshore?
So that's a really good question. So largely what it was actually wanting to be able to innovate quickly.
Mm-hmm.
When you deal with an outside manufacturer, outside manufacturers make their money on consistency. They get a process, they get it working well, and then they just want to crank out your project, your product. And that's how they make their money, is on efficiency. And when you're dealing with Chinese companies, their margins are generally quite thin, and they really need to keep things moving. So when you want to make changes, it's not that easy. There was one time when a major competitor came out with a new product, and we wanted to respond to that really, really quickly. And what I did was that I literally put a bunch of tools on the plane, and I flew to the production line in Japan and in China, excuse me. And I actually sat down on the production line and I trained the people on the production line to do the design change that we wanted. And we responded to this competitive change in the market probably within about, 45 days or something. We had a new product on the market. But that is the exception. It's not that easy to change production when you're dealing with, outside manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So that was the main motivator. Another part of it was actually 3D printing. So 3D printing allowed us to do things and be flexible, because what happens is that so much of your design becomes software.
Right.
Your 3D prints are software. You can change things on your computer. Printed circuit boards are software. The software, embedded software, essentially you've got something that can be very, very rapidly changed. So that was the main driver. It wasn't cost. People always think, or at least, the issue wasn't really that we were worried about the increase in the cost of something. And people, and then what happened was that we actually had, this is not a story necessarily about bringing things onshore, and that's a great story. And it's something that, we're gonna, sing the praises of American manufacturing. It's a mixed story, and what I'm going to say, will probably frustrate some of the listeners, but what we found was that a lot of our supply chain in the United States couldn't do what we needed.
Mm-hmm.
We had suppliers who turned around to us in the United States and actually said to us, "We can't meet your quality standards. We're not interested in meeting your quality standards. They're too high." So we had one supplier who essentially fired us for wanting, product that was too good. We took that component and went back to China with it, and we reduced the cost of that component by 80%. And the quality was really, really much higher. And so the thing is that there's sort of a mixed story in onshoring. So in terms of the supply chain, really what we ended up with was a global supply chain. We do assembly here, but you still have suppliers in China. Right. You still have long supply lines. You still have to work in a global environment. Some products are just not available in the United States, whether you like it or not. So we get components from Japan, we get components from China, we get components from the United States. So the supply chain is a complex web, and we really live in a global economy. No matter where you make something, you're still global.
But I think, the point here, though, is the way I would describe you then is you really are you're not an ODM because you're not outsourced. So you're really design manufacturing. You get your components, you design it, but you then procure the components and you do the manufacturing. You do the assembly, testing, quality control, packaging, ship from the US. So you're a design manufacturer, a captured design manufacturer for your business.
Yep.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about who uses your product. I mean, you and I were sharing during the commercial break, I've never had a digital stethoscope be used on me. Going to the doctor, specialists, whatever. I've never even seen one, albeit I've saw posts, and then I saw some information on yours, which is what triggered you coming onto the show. But where are these being used at, and why are they not being more broadly adopted?
Yeah, these are good questions. So the users run the gamut. We have physicians using them. So even though electronic stethoscopes people are still using conventional stethoscopes by and large, electronic stethoscopes are used by physicians who are particularly interested in listening to sounds. And that's That's actually a minority, because the majority will just listen and they say, oh, something doesn't sound right. I'll refer it out for an echocardiogram. I'll refer it out for imaging study or something like that. So stethoscopes are less relied upon by physicians, but we still have a very loyal following of people who essentially believe in the physical exam. They believe that they can figure things out, and they want to use an echocardiogram to confirm what they heard, as opposed to figure out, well, I don't know what's wrong with this patient, get an echocardiogram. So we have loyal doctors, we have nurses. Telemedicine is a big part of where things are now. What has been very interesting, and that I would emphasize in terms of startups and businesses, is how much you learn from being in the game, what you learn from just participating.
Yeah.
It's a contact sport. And so the thing is that you get your product out there and you start learning. So what we found is that we're sort of at a nexus, being, a long-running electronic stethoscope manufacturer. We essentially hear from everybody in the same way as HP said to me, whoever developed an electronic stethoscope walked through our doors, because we're an electronic, medical electronics company. As a stethoscope company, we're at the nexus of a conversation with so many different users, and telemedicine is a big part of that. Going into COVID, we got into infectious disease management. You can't use a regular stethoscope in an infectious disease situation. Stethoscopes are actually known, conventional stethoscopes, to carry fomites. They fomites. They carry disease from one patient to another. They've got pathogens. They're hard to clean. All that kind of thing. When in 2014 with Ebola, we got called on to help doctors listen to patients remotely when they were in an isolation room, when they were wearing PPE. So we learned about PPE and infectious diseases and all this kind of thing in 2014. Fast forward to March, COVID hits, and then essentially the whole world comes to us and says, we need to manage infectious disease, we need to listen. And we created what we call safe distance auscultation. We basically created the concept of using remote Bluetooth, listen to patients, put the stethoscope with a Bluetooth transmitter inside a Ziploc bag, put headphones onto the PPE so that you're sealed in, but you can still listen to things, use loudspeakers, all these kinds of things. So we are used in many, many different ways, unusual ways.
Yeah, what I was going to get to is this, telemedicine piece, right? Because there's all kinds of devices of, now you got these devices, you put your thumb on it and it gives you, a simple EKG. Now they've got, Cardio's got a 7 lead, you put on your leg, I guess, and it gives you a 7 lead, so if you have a cardiac condition, your cardiologist can see a remote strip. Blood pressure cuffs, everybody bought, blood oximeters. And now you're just going to see more and more of these devices coming into the home. I think, one, not only for things like COVID, but it's also about aging in place, aging population, not wanting to go in a nursing home, but still wanting to be monitored for whatever their health condition is, so that they can stay at home and they can not have to go off and be committed to some medical facility. The doctors and nurses can still monitor patients and just do it remotely. So now, Clive, we were talking at the end of the last segment, we got into a little bit talking about aging in place, where, devices play into that. But let's take a broader context of this. What's the future of healthcare, given all the changes, the rate of innovation, the types of innovation, things like what you're working on with devices? What does the future of healthcare look like?
I think you described it incredibly well. I think you nailed it. There's going to be a lot more remote healthcare, aging in place. I think that's really, really important. And I think it's an incredible enhancement to quality of life for a lot of aging people who, don't want to be in a hospital. They don't want to be in a care facility. They want to be in their own homes. My mother passed away from COVID actually a few months ago.
Oh, I'm so
at
sorry.
the age of 95, and she died at home. She was in her own home, and it was very important to her to not go to a nursing home, to not move out of her house. And this was a big deal. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the value to people of being at home. And so I think that basically the hospital at home is where a lot of the future is going. And this is not, COVID has accelerated phenomena that were occurring before anyway. So remote healthcare was occurring anyway, it was accelerated. Telemedicine was there, accelerated. Remote monitoring, accelerated. Not wanting to go to the doctor, accelerated.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at it's interesting, right? A lot of managers and leaders who are like, oh no, I want employees in the office. We don't want to. All of a sudden now they got forced, and all of a sudden they're like, wow, we're actually more productive. We're able to do more. And I talked to doctors. I have a long-standing relationship with Mayo Clinic, and then talking with them about all their telemedicine. The acceleration. They were doing a little bit of it, but obviously now it's just everything is in that telemedicine realm. And you talk
Yeah,
about aging in
I
place.
think also, if I can
Yep.
interject, apropos of an organization like Mayo Clinic, I think you're going to see the breakdown of borders and the internationalization of healthcare. So Mayo Clinic, Mayo Clinic's already, I believe they've got clinics in the Middle East as
Yeah,
well.
Saudi Arabia.
And they've got people who, historically have flown in on private jets to come to Rochester to, get the best care in the world. And you're going to see the internationalization and the breakdown of borders, and you're going to see healthcare will become a global industry where people can serve people across international borders. That's going to be a massive change.
Well, and it's interesting because this is a conversation that I had with Mayo back when I was at HP, because we were doing some projects with Mayo around telemedicine using a technology that HP had called Halo. But Mayo ran into a problem because doctors licensed in Minnesota could not practice medicine in other states. So even though you were telemedicine, they couldn't practice, right? Well, now with COVID, a lot of the states just got rid of that requirement because it was preventing doctors from servicing, patients who needed access to healthcare. So I think
Yeah.
not only does this impact healthcare, I think it also impacts policymakers to understand that they got to keep up with the rate of innovation because things are changing at such a fast clip. Government rules and regulations cannot keep up, and they've got to
Yeah,
find a way to
policy.
pick
Yeah.
that pace up.
Right. Policy always follows technology, right? Self-driving cars are going to have to adapt the rules.
Right.
Uber just plowed right over regulations on taxi companies. Airbnb goes in. Policy always has to follow, and legislation always has to follow, and the licensure of doctors will follow.
Yeah, and it's interesting because my daughter is a speech language pathologist, and for the last 7, 8 years, 100% of her practice has been telepractice. Her clients are in Bangkok, Philippines, Hong Kong, Rwanda, Africa. So she does
Wow.
her things remotely, and she's been testifying and speaking around the country for years trying to get policymakers to change. Boom, COVID happens. Whoa, policy
Right.
change. Sometimes you
Yep.
need those outside kind of disruptions.
Yeah, she's ahead of the curve.
Yeah, she definitely was ahead of her curve and learned a lot along the way. But it's actually been great equipping her, but also she's been helping others now. She actually teaches other SLPs on how to do telepractice with school systems and et cetera. But it's hard when all of a sudden you got to go from 0 to 100 overnight. So, hey,
Yeah.
Clyde, this has been a great conversation. I really do appreciate you taking the time to come and join us here on the show. If people want to keep track of what you're working on and the products that we talked about today, where's the best place they can follow you at?
Yeah, so I don't tweet. They can come to our website and they can visit thinklabs.com. That's think as in using your brains, and laboratories, LABS, labs as in laboratory. So thinklabs.com is our website, and they can find us there.
Great. Hey, and Clive, again, I really do appreciate you taking the time. It's been a great conversation. Very, very insightful. And I wish you and Thinklabs the best of luck. And I'm going to be keeping my eyes open at my doctor's office and pushing them to step up on their technology curve. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Been
you.
great being here.
So as we wrap up today's show, I wanted to again remind you all the show notes, all the information, links, and that we talk about in today's show are available over at killerinnovations.com. The entire archive going back, we are now in season 16. We will start season 17 in March. It's coming up fast. It's amazing how these dates just keep clicking by. So the entire archive is there. Go over to killerinnovations.com. Right-hand side, you'll see a search bar. You can search for topics, guests, anything in the past. Check it out and have that. Also, would be remiss if I don't remind you, check out the blog over at philmckinney.com. That's more of where I share essays around leadership and thoughts and those types of things. And that's also where we post the show, 5 minutes to new ideas. So check that out. Also want to remind you, check out the Disruptive Ideation Workshop over at disruptiveideation.com. If you are interested or your team's interested in learning some of the skills to really step up the innovation ability of your organization, you want to check that workshops out, disruptiveideation.com. With that, we're going to wrap up today's show. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.